Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dawn of Drones podcast. So great to see everybody out there. Just a reminder, this is live, so please put your comments, your questions, your positive encouragement in the chat. We love all of that. And we are rounding out Defenders Month, and what a better way to do it than with the man, I call him the man, the myth, the legend, Major General retired United States Air Force James Potts.
I don't know about that.
You know, like
maybe
you
myth.
Are, no,
those aren't true, or maybe true.
You are really it when it comes to drones, and particularly, you know, not just commercial, of course, but military drones. So welcome to the podcast, James. So great to have you.
Oh, thanks a bunch, Dawn. I really am looking forward to this. I do a lot of, podcasts on some very obtuse subjects, but it's really good to do a podcast with a good friend on a good subject. So I'm really looking forward to today.
Well, me too. And for those out there, I've been, in fact, I was just interviewed for this magazine called Shout Out Colorado, and they asked me, as people often do, who are your mentors? Who's kind of made a difference in your career? And every time I say Major General Potts, because James, look, even before I won the Woman to Watch award, right, for women in drones, that did inspire me to create my company. You were whispering in my ear, you need to create a company. You need to get out of the Air Force.
There was a little bit more there. I think that was yelling in your ear.
Yeah, you're like, start your business. And you really helped me so much. So everybody out there, just so you know, like no one better as a mentor, as someone to really help you start a business than General Potts, with all of your military-like checklists. It was almost hard to go wrong. So I was
in Strategic Air Command for my first couple of tours. So nothing like SAC drills making checklists into your brain. I got a checklist
great.
right now. So
well, that's a great segue. Let's talk about your stellar career. So you retired as the number 2, right, intel guy for the Air Force?
Yeah, so I was
1?
the deputy chief of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance for the Air Force. I was the senior career intelligence officer in the Air Force. I got out in I should have looked at March of 2013. So it's been a while, but
yeah. But so let's back up. That was kind of when you retired. But tell us about your career. What was that trajectory? What was that path up to 2-star to be the number 2 intel guy for the whole Air Force?
Yeah, it's kind of a weird one. My dad was an enlisted guy in the Air Force. I was the first guy in my family since, I don't know, Civil War to go to college, and I ended up going to Southern Mississippi, which is about an hour and a half north of here. We'll talk more over a beer or something, but I actually, when I went through law school last year of when I went through undergrad last year of my eligibility, my eyes went bad. I always wanted to be a pilot, and so threw a big fit and decided I'd get back in the Air Force. And Dawn, believe it or not, I went to law school at Tulane for a while.
What?
I'll tell you more about that. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Big revelation here for you. This is your one revelation for the podcast. But I was there for a semester and a half. I really didn't like it, and went back to the Air Force. And what the heck else are you going to do with a political science degree and a little bit of law school? But they put me into intelligence. But they put me into a specific type of intelligence, signals intelligence. It's now mainly cyber intelligence. But back in the old days, when people used radios, I was trained to listen into them and then use the enemy's communications against them. My first tour was at Bergstrom Air Force Base in Austin, Texas, which I love Austin. I had a great tour there.
Awesome.
I was in charge of figuring out how to, it was a new thing, and we were going to take out the Soviets' communications and mess them up. So I did that. next tour, best tour of my Air Force career was 3 years flying in the back end of the RC-135, which is a large reconnaissance aircraft out of Mildenhall, England. I'm Anglo-American. My mother's English. She's from London. I was born about, 30 minutes from Mildenhall. So I just loved that. And it was a very, very intense mission. The Cold War was still at its height, and we were flying, reconnaissance missions that we still can't talk about. That was, right up there against the Russians. And then after that, I got assigned to run the Air Force portion of an Army reconnaissance system called Guardrails, an RC-12 little King Air that's got all kinds of receivers in it. Was stationed in Stuttgart, Germany with the U.S. 7th Corps, who was the corps that controlled the sector defending Czechoslovakia, which, I didn't really think too much about until the Czechs decided to open their border both to the west and then the border with East Germany. And I was literally on duty the night the Berlin Wall fell, and most of the East Germans came through our sector. It was just an amazing thing.
Wow.
A few months after that, 7th Corps got sent to Desert Storm, and so I drug my Russian and German linguists with me to Desert Storm. Was there for about 7 months. The tour in San Antonio doing staff work, Navy Command and Staff College, 3 years at Pacific Command, where I was executive assistant to the Commander in Chief, Joe Prayer, as 4-star Admiral, which was a very interesting time. Then I went back to Air War College, and then I got to go back and command the squadron that I flew with at RC-135s in Mildenhall, which was great. But more war. We got sent to Northern Watch to patrol the northern portion of Iraq, and then we spent most of our time fighting the Kosovo Air War, which was pretty intense. Which I actually flew out of England. One of the best experiences of my life was taking off. 7 o'clock in the evening. Well, I always flew at night, and we formed up over the English Channel with fighters from RAF Lakenheath and bombers from RAF Fairford, and flew in a formation just like 8th Air Force would have done back in the old days, into the
Flying Tigers.
Yeah. And so then after that, I made full colonel, and I was assigned to be the chief of intelligence for Central Command Air Forces. So all of the airmen that were flying in Southwest Asia, Saudi Arabia, and all that. Which was great for a year because all we had to do was just patrol the southern part of Iraq for the no-fly zone. But then 9/11 kicked off, and that was purely our responsibility. So I was the third guy off of the first plane to land in Saudi Arabia to set up headquarters to take revenge for 9/11. And that's kind of where I got into my really knowing drones. I'd had experience with drones back in Desert Storm. We were one of the first Army units to use the old Pioneer system, which was an Israeli system that we'd bought back in 91. But for Operation Enduring Freedom, which is what we called the operation in Afghanistan, we were the first one that figured out how to use modern drones, the MQ-1, that were armed. And so did that until we won the war in April, and then I was commander of the 70th Intelligence Wing, which are basically all the airmen that work for the National Security Agency, working out of Fort Meade. And NSA is just a fantastic organization. Some of my favorite people work for NSA. Great 2 years there, and then I got sent to be the director of intelligence for the U.S. Air Forces in Europe. So all of the airmen that were in Europe, including my buddies back in Mildenhall were working for me. Had a great time at Ramstein Air Base, Germany, and got promoted to 1-star, and then was sent to be director of intelligence for Air Combat Command, which is all of the fighters and bombers that are stationed in the continental United States. You're also responsible for, deciding what reconnaissance systems the Air Force should buy and all that stuff. So that was pretty interesting. And then my final job was my retirement job was being the deputy director of intelligence for the whole Air Force. So by the time I retired, we'd gone from having about a combat air patrol into half of the old MQ-1 Predator, which means we got about, on a good day, 20 hours of coverage, to having 65 24/7 combat air patrols, a vastly improved MQ-9 Reaper, which is much better than the MQ-1. And
Yeah,
intelligence had kind of taken the Air Force over. We were about 15% of the budget when I got out, about 24,000 airmen. So.
Unbelievable. Well, I mean, so just to back up for those that aren't really from the military or don't know, like everything the general talked about, the way he made it up to 2-star, when you listen to his career, those are kind of a lot of times the stepping stones, the in residence, different colleges he went to learn about, military strategy and national security and that job he talked about, executive officer, that's kind of one of those kind of linchpins to kind of getting a step, because now you're working for usually a 4-star, 3-star, 2-star general, and you get kind of that inside view, and it's a really great mentorship opportunity. And command, of course, is the penultimate, I'd say, stepping stone as you're kind of moving up the track there. So just absolutely stellar career. And it's interesting, James, because you talk about how early on you were using drones, the ones you bought from the Israelis. I think most people, most civilians, most lay people think, oh, drones, there's something more new, right? Like 9/11 is really when the military started using them. But I mean, you said poli-sci major, a little bit of history here, right? We're talking even in the Vietnam War. Well, I think you can probably go back to the 1800s if you're going to count balloons, but Vietnam War, they were actually, right, they were using literally drones that were just kind of like, they just throw them out there. They'd have a camera on them. They'd shoot a couple snaps and land, and didn't have a lot of control of those things, but even in Vietnam. So this technology, this idea of using it for surveillance and then later for kinetic strikes, and we'll talk about that more here shortly, it's not really new, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, kind of the penultimate Air Force story about drones is actually from World War II, 1944. It was a joint project with the Army Air Forces and the Navy called Project Aphrodite, where they would take an older B-17, fill it full of explosives, and have a line of sight command and control link. So they would have a manned crew would take the B-17 off. They would bail out over England and then turn control of the B-17 over to another one that flew as a wingman, and they were going to fly it into the Nazi U-boat pens. But that resulted, second time we used it, the drone exploded before the pilots can bailed out. It killed one of the Kennedy brothers, and it blew up through fragments into the other B-17 that was controlling it, that had Eisenhower's son as the pilot. And believe it or not, the B-17 that blew up had been worked on by Norma Jean, so by Marilyn Monroe.
Yes, Marilyn Monroe.
We had quite a bit of experience with drones even back then. But yeah, I mean, no kid, my first assignment, that was one of our things in Austin, Texas, was working with Lockheed on a drone they called Aquila. And we had a lot of experience with it back in Vietnam. The big turning point occurred during the Kosovo War when I was, flying manned reconnaissance aircraft, the RC-135. We also had the MQ-1 Predator, which no one thought would work, but this guy Abe Karam, who's a friend of mine and still out designing drones, we always you always think aircraft are designed by designers, and they kind of come up with the wings and stuff, but back in the old days, you'd get the engine first, and then you design the aircraft around it. What Abe decided to do was to get the data link and design the aircraft around that. So if you've ever seen the MQ-1 Predator, it's got this bulbous nose. That's a fairly big satellite communication link, and it was the first time that we'd use SATCOM to control drones. And that was important because we use geostationary satellites, basically the same satellites that give you satellite TV, which allows you to fly anywhere within the hemisphere because a geostationary satellite covers that. So no longer were drones restricted to line of sight, which previously killed a Kennedy, wounded an Eisenhower, because we had to have line of sight between those two B-17s, which means you could only fly a drone on a very, very, very good day from another aircraft about 150 miles away. Whereas with the MQ-1, you could fly it, no math in public, 1,500 miles away if you had to. So that was the turning point, and that's why they were so useful in Kosovo, and that's why we were able to fly them in Afghanistan, was because we could station the crews anywhere within a hemisphere and still fly the aircraft.
Yeah, we actually, we align our Drone Law Connections Clubhouse every Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern with this podcast. And I know you couldn't make it last week, James. So we had one of your colleagues and now mine, Wayne Phelps, Lieutenant
Oh
Colonel
yeah,
retired.
Wayne. Yeah, I'm sorry, but
United
I'm
States
going to have to
Marine
say
Corps.
this because I can rarely say it. I was actually in Hawaii, so there you go.
Yeah. So author of On Killing Remotely. And, I know you actually did a little review of this book
Yeah,
at the
I did
beginning of it.
yeah.
And he talks about in the book, and he talked about on Clubhouse how, initially right after 9/11 kicked off, we had these things in the sky. They were not armed. Right? They were just surveillance, ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. And, we had some airmen get eyes on Osama bin Laden early on. Maybe it was actually before. You know what he said? He corrected me on Clubhouse. It was before 9/11 where they found him at Tarnack Farms. Because if you recall, right, we had the USS Cole bombing and, some embassy things happening. And we were lobbing the bombs over there in Afghanistan, kind of whack-a-mole. And then they saw the guy and they had no way to take him out. And by the time, everything went through all the different channels and approvals and you got other assets, it was too late. And according to Wayne, that's kind of what led to this epiphany of, we need to get some Hellfires or something on board these things. So when we see something, we can actually just do something about it at the same time.
Yeah, and I was read into a lot of that stuff, so I really can't comment on the particulars of what happened. But a really good book to read is by Frank Riddle. It's Whittle. It's on the secret story of the Predator, and he goes through the story and at least what Frank has said. These guys, allegedly saw UVL the summer before, and to really get him, if you look at the physics behind that, he was in Afghanistan. We would have had to have launched a cruise missile from a Navy vessel in the Indian Ocean, which would have been, several hours time of flight, and he would have been someplace else. And so General Jumper, who was my commander during the Kosovo Air Wars, the commander of the U.S. Air Forces in Europe, was chief of staff of the Air Force, and he was looking at what these guys were doing and just, sat down and said, gentlemen, we're going to arm the Predator, and turned it over to an organization called Big Safari in the Air Force. And these guys had it armed within about 6 months, according to the book, which, we all thought was nuts. We thought it was going to blow the wing off, yada, yada, yada. Turns out you should not go to a political scientist for anything to do with aerospace engineering. So they were right, I was wrong. And that closed, what we call the kill chain. It's kind of a graphic description of it. But, back in the old days, before we had armed drones, you would have had to have, had a fighter right alongside it. And we probably could have buddy lased, to where the drone would have put his laser on target, or laser, and put a laser guided bomb on there, which may have been okay, but then you've got a fighter that on a good day is going to be able to stay up for about 6 to 8 hours with a drone that'll stay up for 20. And so you never can cycle them out, but having them armed really helped. And the old MQ-1 were only armed with Hellfire missiles, which has about a 15-pound warhead. So there was not too many things you could take out with them, which is why we went to the Reaper, which is roughly got the usable payload of an F-16 minus the 20 millimeter cannon.
Well, that's actually a great point. I think when people think about armed drones, and of course in the media, the way they're portrayed, and some of the, God bless them. I mean, they're doing an amazing job. Some of the non-governmental organizations out there that are watchdogs, they've kind of given drones a bad name, and people, I think, in the public question. In fact, and I know you were a part of this, and whether you can admit or deny it here, but even within the Air Force, when I was at Air Combat Command, which you were at, I think, several years prior to me, and it was during the Obama administration, people were asking, like, oh, what are the special rules, under the law of war, international humanitarian law that apply to drones? And, so we had to routinely give briefings to people to say, there's no special rules. Like, this is merely a tool just like any other. Those same, things in the law of armed conflict, whether it's military necessity, right? You only target things that have an operational
Right.
value, right? Proportionality, you do a risk analysis and you weigh, does the potential damage to non-military targets substantially outweigh the military value? I mean, these are just a couple of them. Of course, all of these things apply. There's a
Right.
weapons review. And so I'd love for you to comment on that, because just to dispel, to the extent that there are non-military folks out there, or even military folks that aren't super familiar with how drones work in the field, on the battlefield, that the same rules apply. They're just merely another tool in our toolkit.
Well, they are. I mean, I get into this debate, a lot, and there's a lot of people that are, anti-drone or really anti-war, and which I'm anti-war myself. And, their theory is that drones make, warfare so easy, and, there's no risk. So, we can shoot these things willy-nilly out there. And, to a large extent, they're right. We happen to be talking about the first people to use these, or, the Israelis, the United States, some of our close Western allies, like the Brits. But the concern everyone should have about drones is they're going to proliferate worldwide. I mean, I write a lot about this on my LinkedIn side, is that you can now buy a much better Air Force than you've ever had in history, very cheap.
Well, anybody can now.
Yeah,
right?
anybody can. Any country that may not have the scruples that we do, or the laws. But if you are talking about the United States and our close allies, our NATO allies and all that, I would argue that we have a much more rigorous review process for what we do with unmanned weapons than we do sometimes with manned weapons. For example, if you've got an A-10 that's in a troops in contact situation in Afghanistan, that A-10 is only talking with the commander on the ground and his joint tactical air controller, and they're don't have the technology available that our remote systems do. They don't have this camera that's flying at 15,000 feet, and satellites available, and all the resources, the National Security Agency and all these other intel agencies to support them. It's just captain in an A-10 talking to an Army captain, talking to an Air Force staff sergeant down there. But for goodness sake, if we're going to do a remote shot, I mean, there's dozens of people involved in doing it. And even though we have dozens of people involved, and it can take days, sometimes weeks, to clear a target, we still make mistakes. So it's something that, I believe had to be exercised extremely cautiously. And it's got to be gone into the fact that even with the greatest amount of caution you can possibly get, there's still a lot of margin for terrible errors and mistakes out there. But if you look at it in the panoply of life, I mean, I always, tell people, okay, well, you don't like drones. How do you want us to kill our adversaries? I mean, hand grenades, bayonets are a little bit too close. Rifles are a little bit too close. We've been using long-range weapons for a long time. I mean, I'm Anglo-American. The French are still mad at us for, the Battle of Agincourt, where we used English longbowmen against the French knights and wiped out almost an entire ruling caste out there. And to this day, the British still, use the V for victory. There's another thing they do with two fingers. We don't want to get into that. But one legend has it is because Englishmen were captured. Any Englishmen that were captured after the Battle of Agincourt had their two fingers cut off, so they couldn't draw their bow back. So,
oh wow,
remote killing's got a tremendous history, and even in the Battle of Agincourt, we didn't really control what we were doing, and nearly wiped out a generation of French nobility. So
wow.
It's not a new thing at all. But it is something that I would exercise. I would say anybody remotely involved in remote killing needs to exercise a tremendous amount of caution. And it's something that I worry about as drone technology inevitably proliferates, that it will end up with people that don't have the safeguards and the scruples that we necessarily have in the West and with our close allies.
Well, yeah, clear. I mean, I'm talking about the law of war here, emanating from Geneva, the Geneva Conventions, and a number of treaties, right, over time, customary international law. Since you went to law school for a couple of years, and
I talked with a
so
lot of JAGs about the law of armed conflict too. A lot of judge
absolutely,
advocate generals.
but you're right. Like the terrorists, they don't abide by that, and with any human endeavor, there's always room for error. But I think Phelps does a great job in his book explaining, like you said, from kind of throwing rocks to the longbow to to missiles to drones, and then of course the second, third order effects and the unforeseen challenges of that on those warriors that are performing these operations, not just deployed for a couple of months and that's all you're doing. I mean, they're talking
Right.
we're talking 4-year assignments where on a daily basis they're having to transition physically, mentally, and go home and coach the kids soccer team or
Right.
whatever. Just a lot of challenges with that. But I want to kind of transition a little bit to talk about something you alluded to, this idea that warfare and the weapons of war have evolved over time, and drones now are, I would say, a staple on the battlefield. I think Phelps called it, kind of this pred porn, this insatiable appetite for commanders to not only have eyes on everything that's happening in the field, even if they're way, way far from it, but also then to protect those troops. You use the term troops in contact. For those out there that don't know what that means, that's basically when you've got a bunch of soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and maybe now in the future Guardians, the Space Force, out there, and they're getting attacked by the enemy, kind of maybe even surrounded. Troops in contact, you call in some kind of an asset to from overhead help protect them. And drones are notorious for helping in those efforts, not only provide the information, but sometimes also to provide that kind of hard, that weaponry on the ground to disperse
Right.
or get rid of those enemies that are hurting our own people. Let's talk a little bit about what you're seeing then, James, as maybe trends for the future. We know that drones are being used prolifically for ISR. They're being used for targeted, specific targeted operations. I've read things lately, and in fact, you post up so much. By the way, everybody out there, if you're not following James on LinkedIn, if this is a topic that you're interested, you need to follow him. And I'm looking forward. I'm throwing out there you got to be writing this book at some point. I want to read your
If
book.
you help
Uh,
me, yeah.
I'll help you. I will help
Hate
you.
writing.
So, I mean, I think you might have posted up using a drone for refueling as an example.
Right.
We're seeing a lot of stuff regarding swarms. What are, let's just maybe go top three. What are the top three things that you think we're going to be seeing maybe in the next 5 years or so on the battlefield when it comes to drones?
So if we're just restricted to the battlefield, we're
Yeah.
definitely going to see aerial refueling, and the United States Navy, is leading the charge with that with the MQ-25 Stingray. I hope the Navy eventually arms the Stingray, which I think they will. That's got tremendous impact because probably the most complex thing you do in military aviation is air-to-air refueling. And if the Navy's able to pull this off and they're able to pull it off safely, then that would have been, the toughest thing that you can do, from a mechanical flying skill. The next project to watch very closely is Air Force Research Lab with a project they're calling Skyborg. And Skyborg is designed to set up the autonomy core system, the central nervous system that we're going to use for truly autonomous drones. They've had a couple of tests. So once Skyborg sets up the autonomy core system and has the central nervous system, we're then going to go into true artificial intelligence. Air Force Research, or DARPA, has gone into some artificial intelligence experiments. Matter of fact, they had a famous one, Alpha Warrior trials they did about 9 months ago, in which they took a series of companies, big guys, Lockheed Martin, little guys here in AI systems, and started with an AI system that didn't know how to fly, and got it to a point to where it not only knew how to fly an F-16, it knew how to dogfight an F-16 and beat a U.S. Air Force weapons school Top Gun pilot 5 times in a row. out there.
Wow.
And so Skyborg Autonomy Core System, AI, is going to come up with brains, and they're going to be different, types of brains. The Air Force initially wants to start with an adversary air artificial intelligence type drone that right now we use a variety of adversary equipment, aircraft, F-16s that are painted to look like MiGs with actual pilots. In the future, these are going to be drones are going to be programmed not just to dogfight, but to dogfight like an adversary pilot, Chinese or Russian or whatever. So that's going to be absolutely huge. The other one is a little bit more esoteric, and it's to watch the way that the U.S. and our close allies intend to fight in the Pacific. They're going to do it in a very drone-heavy way. They're going to do it with distributed drones. They're going to create what Air Force Intelligence is calling a sensor grid, to where all of these sensors can talk to each other. Most of them are going to be unmanned. A good number of them are going to be attritable, which is an Air Force word that means, if you get the aircraft back for 5 or 10 sorties, great. If it gets shot down, who cares? And it'll be very interesting to see how they put that together, because that will be the future of warfare. It's going to be very distributed. It's going to be largely unmanned. It's going to be a high degree of autonomy out there, and you're going to see the first edges of true artificial intelligence out there. I don't think we're going to see artificial intelligence used to authorize weapons release on its own. You're going to continue to see a person in the loop when we do that, but maybe not 5 years, 10, 15, 20. We're going to have to go across that next big ethical stop, which is, do you allow artificial intelligence to actually, use weapons to engage targets? And,
yeah,
Terminator.
we talk. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where people will get super nervous, right? Because then now you're talking Terminators and, the stuff that we see in movies. By the way, when we were talking earlier about kind of the distributed operations, if you guys haven't watched Eye in the Sky with Helen Mirren, I think that's a really great.
That's a great one.
I think it's a great one because it really depicts kind of this coalition, the moral, dilemmas that happen during these operations, what the real things people go through. But that's just kind of reality, I think, closer to reality than what we hope is not going to be reality with Terminator or something. I think that's where people get really nervous. And we were talking in Clubhouse about Duke Law and Dr. Missy Cummings is not with Duke Law. She's with Duke. She's a engineer. She's she was one of the first.
I know Missy very well. She's a great thinker.
Spectacular. And she's written a lot about this idea of military drones, artificial intelligence. What does it mean?
Right.
And her position is, look, we right now don't have the technology that will discriminate, especially in a dynamic situation where you can really trust that this could be done correctly. I mean, yeah, humans introduce a lot of error into any given operation, but
right.
So maybe some static, pre-planned, don't expect anything to go weird, but we all know, what do they say? Like, your plan only survives like first contact with the enemy, right? It's all good until it's not. So interesting thing, and I was just, James, at Grand Forks a couple weeks ago, where Northrop Grumman is now taking those Global Hawks that they've just decommissioned, the Air Force has decommissioned, turning them into Range Hawks for this new Sky Range concept.
Yeah, for the Missile Defense Agency.
Yeah, they're going to stick the hypersonic missiles on there and make a range in the sky as opposed to on the ground, or lining up a bunch of ships that takes forever, it costs a ton of money, and
right.
It's totally obvious to our enemies. Just launch one of these suckers up, fire off the hypersonic missile, at least initially for R&D. So really interesting stuff. I think we're going to see in the Skyborg. I love the names we make for these things. I mean, even Reaper, Predator, it's like no wonder people are like freaked out by it, but I know that's deliberate to kind of get in the enemy's mind, mess with their minds a little bit. So let's talk about the enemy for a second. You're talking about all the cool things we might see, on our side of the fence. I assumed that I assume that some of the nation states, let's just call it what it is, near peers, or I actually saw one document where a very high level person actually called China up here, which I almost fell off my chair. You know, are they doing the same stuff, or do we expect to see something different? I mean, and let's not just the nation states, but maybe the smaller groups, like you kind of talked about this democratization of air forces. You can go online and buy a quadcopter, get a bunch of those, and now all of a sudden you got little kamikaze missiles, right? And all kinds of interesting things terrorists are doing with the drones. What do you expect to see from the other side of the fence, from the enemy?
Yeah, it's interesting, and keep in mind, the basis of all warfare is cultural, and and you could almost set your watch by what the United States or our close allies would do, because we're very air power friendly. We're very technology, friendly. The motto since World War II, based on our experience with World War I, has been, metal, not flesh. So, we're going to send machines in. So yeah, we use drones. We use them, very carefully. We've got this long history of, particularly in the U.S. of precision bombing and all that stuff that we haven't always lived up to. But, at least we try to do that. And then you contrast that, with the Russians, for example, and they still believe in, large ground forces and, large force against large force. They've been strangely, reluctant to adopt drones, and even more reluctant to adopt autonomy. I mean, and it's to the point now that it's just weird that they haven't done more. They've suffered quite a bit at the hands of Western drones in proxy conflict in Georgia and South Ossetia and the Ukraine area. So they're starting to slowly pick them up, but they're about where we were in the late 90s in there. Other end of the spectrum are the Chinese. The Chinese actually don't have almost zero combat experience. They really haven't fought. Last time they fought, they lost, against the Vietnamese, in the mid 70s, and haven't really fought then. But they're very good at, making chips. They're very good at technology. You see a larger use by drones by the People's Liberation Army out there, and in the back of their minds, I think they're thinking if they could just crack the code on AI, and they put a tremendous amount of effort into AI, they can write algorithms that'll obviate the need to have Top Gun fighter pilots like we have in the U.S. Air Force, or they can steal our AI or whatever. And then in the middle are the Iranians, and the Iranians, have been the victims of particularly Israeli. Their proxies have been the victims of Israeli, drones for decades. They know how effective they are. They use them in a plausibly deniable manner, and they use them pretty daggum effectively in a very frightening manner. They're not the world's best drones. Google Ababil, one is, looks like it was built by a, fourth grader, but they're cheap. They are these kamikaze drones. You can smuggle them in anywhere. They nearly took out one of the largest oil refineries in Saudi Arabia with drones that were largely launched from Saudi soil. Tremendous amount of conflict going on in Yemen, Lebanon, and all that. So I think between the three extremes, kind of the technology deniers, the Russians that are starting to pick up, the enthusiastic technology adopters, the Chinese, and the Iranians, we're going to see some interesting stuff. The the folks I always tell everybody to look at are our NATO allies, Turkey. They've got a very good middle of the road approach to where they're adopting largely MQ-1, MQ-9 like aircraft, and thus far they've been very tightly under the control of the Turkish government out there, but they've been really effective for the relative lack of experience that the Turkish armed forces have with drones. Effective in a number of areas out there. So those are the ones I would watch to see technology that is pretty affordable, pretty exportable, and very usable out there, because you'll never see, the United States will never, allow the MQ-9 to, be sold to anybody other than a close ally. So you won't see a lot of proliferation there. Turks, they're not going to sell them to just anybody, but they'll sell them to a wider audience of people than we will.
Yeah, I totally understand. And maybe that's a great segue also with our last couple minutes here to talk a little bit about your company, ISR Ideas. Tell us why you started it and kind of what you do and how people can tap into the work that you're doing.
Yeah, no, when I got out of the Air Force, I'd cut a deal with Mississippi State University to win on the FAA's Drone Research Center, which we did. The Alliance for System Safety of UAS through Research Excellence, or ASSURE.
ASSURE.
I ran that for about a year after we won it, and then the choice was I could move back up to DC and go work in the Intel community, or work for one of the big companies out there. But I decided to get into consulting, and I've loved every minute of it. I do my best to work in the commercial drone sector, to make up for all of the stuff I've done with armed drones over the years. A lot of my business is still military and non-drone related with the intelligence community, but I'm really out there looking for the folks that have a really good idea, that maybe are having trouble getting across to the DoD, or certainly having trouble getting across to the FAA. And I kind of employ a team of champions approach, to where if I've got a problem I can't handle, for example, the FAA, I'll bring in other team members, consulting affiliates that I work with. So, for example, do a lot of work with Karen DeMayo, who has the world's best named consulting company, Aero DeMayo.
Yes.
She's a 28-year FAA vet. So if it's got anything to do with the FAA, we'll work it as a team. I'll do the DoD side. Karen will do the arguing with the FAA side. I also do a lot of work with Duetto Group, Sean Bullard and his folks. Sean is one of the handful of independent drone lobbyists out there, although he's not lobbying as much as he used to. But his secret sauce is anything to do with the Hill, anything to do with state or local government. He handles it out there. So we do, quite a bit of teamwork and all this kind of good stuff out there.
That's go ahead.
And
you write for Inside Unmanned Systems magazine.
Write a monthly column for Inside Unmanned magazines. I've been doing that for, I don't know, 5 years now.
And fun.
Post a lot on LinkedIn. I like posting on LinkedIn. It's kind of fun.
He does. And fun fact, James actually introduced me to that magazine and got me one of my first gigs in my business, writing their Law Tech Connect column, and now I'm writing for Inside GNSS too. So really thankful for that. And well, look, we talked just at the Energy Drone and Robotics Coalition Summit. It's really all about relationships in this industry, and the connections you've mentioned, the people, whether it's Karen DeMayo, who's amazing, and Sean Bullard, of course, all great people, and the just knowing you too. In our maybe last 2 minutes, I want to maybe foot stomp this idea that there is a nexus between the commercial and the military drone industries, because I think some people believe it's like completely stovepiped and never the twain shall meet, and I think they're missing out, because in my experience, it's those SBIR contracts, it's the kind of work that AFWorks is doing with Agility Prime and some of their other initiatives, and every service and every federal laboratory has a similar program, whether it's technology transfer and transition or something else. NASA, where you can get involved as a startup, a new company, and really get your foot in the door on some really amazing work. Like Jack Elston from Black Swift Technologies was just on our UAS Colorado Clubhouse on Monday, talking about all of his work with NOAA and in volcanoes and hurricanes and tornadoes, and really grew that company out of Boulder. So I don't know if you want to comment on that before we maybe call it.
Yeah, no, there's a tremendous nexus. I mean, we in the military, been flying drones since World War I or whatever, and really been flying them heavily since the 90s. We've cracked all of the code it takes to really fly drones safely beyond line of sight, which is the big deal out there. Currently, commercial drones can pretty much only fly within visual line of sight under Part 107 rules. And, if you've got a pilot that's watching it within visual line of sight and you're not allowed to fly over people, then that kind of by definition is pretty safe, because it's only a 55-pound drone, can only fly up to 400 feet. And okay, but there's only so much of a market you can make flying with a visual line of sight, and we've pretty much saturated that. So for example, Hollywood has gone to drones completely. I defy you to show me a helicopter camera shot nowadays. They're all done with drones. But the next big thing is to go beyond visual line of sight, and that's going to involve a whole bunch of stuff that the military can help with, but can't get you across the finish line. So for example, procedures on how to fly beyond line of sight. The military's got very safe procedures to do that. Our aircraft are airworthy according to Department of Defense procedures, but we don't certify the civilian airworthiness side, and that's a big thing that the FAA is dealing with right now. They've got, I think, 32 aircraft in type certification for beyond line of sight thought. But the big thing that the military, can really help with is showing you how we've done it, and then providing an analog to how you can do it on the civilian side. But it has to be accepted by the FAA, and it has to be translated into civilian standards before you go forward. But the good news is, we know how to do it. We know how to do it safely. The MQ-9, last time I checked, is actually safer to fly than the F-16. I believe the Global Hawk is still the #2 safest aircraft in Air Combat Command. So it can be done. It's just translating that to where non-military pilots can make use of it. That we're the crossroads that we're at now with the FAA.
That's perfect. And we're at our time here, so I want to make sure people know how they can connect with you, James. You mentioned LinkedIn. Is there any other way you'd like to throw out for folks to be able to connect with you?
Well, you can go check out my website, www.isr-ideas.com. I used to do Twitter. I've kind of become disenchanted with Twitter and Facebook these days, with what they're doing to our society. So I don't really use that. I do have an ISR handle, but the best way is to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I really like LinkedIn. It's maintained its professionalism, and it's a good way to exchange, professional discussion on topics that are of interest of all of us, like artificial intelligence.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate you. This was absolutely spectacular. And like I said, you just closed out Defense Month for us, the month dedicated to the theme of defenders. So thank you for that. For everybody out there, we are now transitioning to a month dedicated to innovation. And we're going to kick that off tomorrow on the Drone Law Connections Clubhouse at 11 a.m. Mountain, 1 p.m. Eastern. With Lori DeMatteis from Iris Automation. So when you think about beyond visual line of sight,
okay,
Iris is
company,
on the
Iris.
leading edge, of detect and avoid technologies. So Lori's going to be talking about all the different initiatives Iris has going on, the Beyond program, and working with a number of partners, including in Canada. And so really have her tomorrow. So join us there. And then next Wednesday, same time, same place, we'll have John Damish, the CEO of Iris, on here. So, and they are sponsoring this month of innovation. So we really appreciate Iris Automation. They've been wonderful partners for P3 Tech and me personally this past year. Really grateful for them. So, well, that's all she wrote. Thank you again, everybody. Thanks for dialing in, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, sir.
All right. Let's take care. Great talking to you.